Bentz, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this opportunity. Since the beginning of Congress, Republicans on the House Natural Resources Committee have been calling on committee Democrats to take up legislation to address the myriad crises facing Americans. A little more than a month ago, the price of gasoline for U.S. consumers hit historic highs, topping out at over $5 a gallon for regular unleaded, more than $5.80 for diesel. U.S. households are spending an additional $341 per month to purchase the same goods and services compared to a year ago, thanks to President Biden's inflation and energy crises. Americans are feeling the pinch, with polls showing 82% of Americans are concerned about rising energy prices caused by the Biden administration's and congressional Democrats' anti-energy policies. Across the western United States, drought and wildfire are ravaging communities. My district is ground zero for both severe drought and catastrophic wildfires. Tragically, we find ourselves enduring yet another catastrophic wildfire year. Already, 5.5 million acres have been lost. This alarming figure is nearly 3 million more acres than had burned at this time last year. If this astounding pace continues, 2022 will go down as the most destructive wildfire year of all time. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, nearly 70% of the United States, an area home to more than 116 million Americans, is being impacted by drought conditions. Lake Mead, which helps supply water to more than 25 million people, is at its lowest level since 1937. Amid these crises, committee Democrats have turned a blind eye to these ongoing disasters and instead taken up legislation on topics like big cat ownership, zoonotic diseases, and banning American mining of the kinds of mineral resources needed to produce kinds of clean energy technologies they purport to support. Now, with just days left before the August recess, committee Democrats have awakened, seemingly, to the crises the rest of America has been dealing with for months, if not years. But without so much as a hearing or markup, committee Democrats have produced from thin air this more than 500-page bill, which is little more than a progressive wish list of pet projects and continued out-of-control spending. Unfortunately, the spaghetti-thrown-at-the-wall approach we see in the so-called Wildfire Response and Drought Resiliency Act is par for the course from this majority, and I'm here to tell you the legislation for us is far from the solution Democrats purport it to be. To address our drought crisis, Republicans have called for reauthorizing the bipartisan no-cost and all of the above water strategy embodied in the provisions of Subtitle J of the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation, the WIN Act, which would promote new water storage and make communities more drought resilient. We have urged common sense ESA reforms and cutting environmental red tape, actions that could immediately end time delays and increased overhead costs that limit water storage capacity, withhold water supplies from communities, and increase costs for consumers. Instead, Democrats have placed before us a bill as to water that authorizes more than $4 billion in new federal funding toward unnecessary research, studies, and environmental restoration projects that do not deliver water to communities in desperate need of it. Only provisions in one of the 8 titles in the drought section of this bill have gone through any semblance of regular order. The vast majority of the provisions in all of these titles have never been marked up by the Natural Resource Committee, and one of the titles has never been introduced in the House until now. The bill picks winners and losers when it comes to water supplies while ignoring the long-term need for enhanced water storage infrastructure, and creates a federal water monitoring program that potential litigants can weaponize against farmers and ranchers to further curtail their water supplies. We have solutions embodied in water-related amendments offered to the committee and ask that you make those in order. Like its title suggests, this bill only attempts to respond to wildfires, not actually prevent them. The bill confounds all expectations by failing to include any new authorities to promote the kinds of scientific forest management that we know will decrease the threat of catastrophic wildfires to communities. Instead, a mere 6 months after the Forest Service unveiled a 10-year strategy to address the wildfire and forest health crisis, this bill mandates the development of a new 10-year strategy. Having the agency complete another 10-year strategy is mindless bureaucratic nonsense that will divert agency attention away from the actual management work that needs to get done now. The current 10-year strategy is extremely focused on targeting our highest risk firesheds to prevent more catastrophes like what happened in Paradise, California, where an entire town was leveled by wildfire. The new wildfire strategy would focus on unrelated matters like recreation and old-growth forests. The bill includes no streamlining provisions that address the root causes of catastrophic wildfires, which are bureaucratic red tape, analysis paralysis, and a failure to implement scientific forest management on the landscape. The bill fails to address frivolous litigation, which is allowing rogue environmental groups to tie up critical forest management projects across the country. Refusing to address the weaponization of environmental statutes, such as NEPA and ESA, will only lock up our forests in the same bureaucratic morass that has gotten us into the current forest health crisis, and won't allow us to treat additional acreage at the pace and scale needed to fully address this issue. To put this in proper perspective, there are some 90 million acres of forest in just the 3 West Coast states alone. This is the equivalent of 3 Pennsylvanias. Republicans have offered several amendments that include real solutions, including an amendment offering the text of the Resilient Federal Forests Act, a bill which I am proudly co-sponsoring with Ranking Member Westerman. While the bill's proponents will tell you it improves compensation for our brave wildland firefighters, the reality is far different from these talking points. The fact is, the legislation will give 0 wildland firefighters a pay raise, as all firefighters currently make above the $20 per hour floor set in the legislation. In the long term, without a stable funding source, this legislation could result in layoffs of more than 610 wildland firefighters. Furthermore, while the legislation seeks to create new benefits for such firefighters, the legislation excludes roughly 10,000 brave men and women putting their lives on the line to fight fires from receiving these new benefits. This is nearly 40% of the federal wildfire fighting force. In a classic case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions, this legislation is more likely to be a critical blow to workforce morale and fire preparedness than it is a vehicle to take care of the brave men and women who put their lives on the line, protecting natural resources and communities from wildfire. Finally, at a time when we should be unleashing American energy and looking for ways to lower the pain at the pump our constituents are feeling, this legislation is likely to make energy more expensive. The legislation advances a new regulatory scheme in the name of, quote, environmental justice, end quote, overlaying new regulatory burdens on nearly every federal project, giving nearly every city or urban area in the U.S. a special status that will provide more opportunities for lawsuits to block major projects that are critical to infrastructure, energy, and natural resource development. In addition, the bill would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act and authorize a new $1 billion per year climate justice grant program that would duplicate existing federal programs and serve as a slush fund to fund Democrat priorities under the guise of climate justice. While Democrats look to advance a bill full of half-baked ideas and slush fund for pet projects, we Republicans are offering real solutions in the form of amendments to address our fire and drought crises. Many of these amendments have been introduced in the House as standalone legislation that are ready for the floor today. I encourage this committee to reject H.R. 5118 and instead take up legislation that will actually address the many crises of the Biden administration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.